Okay, so we are live. Welcome everyone to the podcast Dreaming in Symbols. This is a podcast dedicated to the study and discussion of religion, psychology, mythology, history, and mysticism. While most platforms of discourse represent a strictly literal or reductionist approach, this podcast offers a third path, one grounded in psychology and spirituality. The show will include special guests and co-hosts on a regular basis, and my special guest for today in this episode is Farhan Qureshi. We've had Farhan on the show before, and today we are going to be discussing, him and I, the topic of Islam, specifically conversion to and apostasy from the religion of Islam, and what are some of the implications of that journey and that experience. We'll probably talk about conversion and apostasy in general terms, but Farhan and I, what we have in common is that we both used to consider ourselves Sunni Muslims, and we no longer consider ourselves as such. And so I guess that's the label could be slapped on us that we are apostates. And so, yeah, I want to thank you, Farhan, for joining me today.
Thank you, Colin. I think this is a perfect topic for you and I to discuss. I was looking forward to having this conversation and this kind of publication for a while now. So this is perfect timing.
Good. I'm glad. And same here. I mean, I think I think I've been, well, at least many of my more recent videos, I've sort of skated around directly talking about this subject, with the exception of a few people who maybe have asked me straight up, either on Twitter or on some YouTube comments, do I still consider myself a Muslim in the sense that I used to? With the exception of answering those individuals particularly, I haven't really made a video where I have straight out talked about apostasy in a personal context. So I agree that this is something that I've been looking forward to as well. I guess having mentioned sort of when you stop considering yourself a organized, a member of the organized faith of Islam, I'm wondering, did you, for yourself, find it difficult to publicly broadcast it in a very straightforward way? I mean, I know you had mentioned you had published an article online talking about your apostasy, and I'm just wondering, did you struggle up to that moment with actually going public with that information?
Oh, I actually struggled with it for 2 years, Colin, believe it or not. And, that was coming from a Salafi background. Salafism is a school of thought within Sunni Islam. And that says that you should understand and practice and interpret Islam as the first 3 generations would practice, understand, and interpret the Quran and the Sunnah. And so my last 2 years, it was actually after undergrad in psychology, that I really began to question my own beliefs and really do some introspection psychologically, confronting my biases, my defense mechanisms, and so on and so forth. Some social psychological concepts there, such as the peripheral route to persuasion, and we'll probably touch on those during this conversation. But once I started doing introspection, I saw my own delusions, I saw my own biases, I saw my own defense mechanisms that would keep me from considering alternative perspectives. I would search for answers that would confirm my biases. I would have cognitive dissonances, meaning 2 conflicting views simultaneously. And so as I began to do introspection and notice these things, there was a struggle going on. And as you know, went towards the Mu'tazila, right, approach. Maybe the Muslims for progressive values, maybe Sufism has the answers. And no matter where I turned, traditionalism would show its face and say, you're not a Muslim. And so then I had just had to kind of admit that, based on the beliefs that I have, I wouldn't be considered a Muslim. Am I lying to myself? And based on the what I understood to be the theological consensus, I wasn't a Muslim. I rejected the notion that people would be tortured in a literal fire for theological differences, among other issues. And then finally I said, I have to make the decision. And I did, and I wrote Dr. Ali Sina, the person who runs Faith Freedom. And we talked about it a little bit. And then I wrote an article, and there it was. What about yourself, Colin?
Well, very well. Thank you for mentioning that. Very similar to my own experience. In fact, just last night when I was contemplating this conversation with you, not that I haven't forgotten the concepts of cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias, but certainly I thought about it. It came up for me again last night when I was contemplating our discussion of this topic. I would say that my experience was very similar to yours. Certainly, a few things that happened for me was when I was about to begin my junior year of as an undergrad. I took this comparative religion course, and the course just blew my mind because I signed up for it thinking, because I was a transfer student. I transferred from a community college to a 4-year, and I thought, okay, my last semester in this community college, I'm going to take this comparative religion class because I know everything about this topic. This was my arrogance talking. It's like, oh yeah, I've been doing YouTube stuff, and I've been studying comparative religion for a few years now. So this will be an easy A, and I'll just have a chance to sort of debate people and argue with people. And so I got into the class, and by like day 1, day 2 of the class, the professor had completely blown my mind with really opening my mind to the possibility that you don't need to look at religion. There's various ways to approach religion, and I'm sure we can talk about this again in detail. But he had basically come up with a variation with which I have been talking about in a few videos of mine. I usually reduce it to reductionism, literal approach, and then a more of a symbolic approach, and that's how he explained the 3 approaches. He actually got this, I think, I have the book here, David M. Wolfe, which is The Psychology of Religion, which I would recommend to check out. And he, I think, was the individual who came up with this. He has like a graph, and it's like, anyway, 4 quadrants, and it's like literal affirmation. It's like, do you exclude transcendence or inclusion? Are you more literal? Or are you more symbolic? And since he's come up with that, there have been other psychologists who have done studies where they've done surveys, and they've been able to basically place people on this graph. So some people may lean more towards more of a symbolic approach, a psychological approach to spirituality, and they'll include transcendence, or maybe they approach things symbolically, but they exclude transcendence. And there's more of a literal fundamentalist approach, and then there's like the more atheistic approach, materialistic approach. So when I saw that really just kind of, that amongst other things, just blew my mind. And I began to, where I began to doubt, and we talked about this, I think, in the last episode that I had you on, was the historicity of the Exodus. And when I was faced with the realization that the Exodus story, which I sort of assumed had happened historically and literally. I mean, I was reading the Quran, and I just thought to myself, well, if the Quran's talking about these things, I had no conscious awareness that the Quran could be talking about things that weren't historically accurate. So then when I did some research for my final paper for this class and discovered there was no historical evidence for any of it, I was left with for me, there were 2 options. Do I just can the entire thing, or do I try to take a more symbolic approach? Because I saw that there was meaning for the story without it necessarily being reliant on history or factual, physical evidence. That there could be more of a psychological meaning for the story of the Exodus. And so that journey, the beginning right there, and then I transferred and became a psych major at a 4-year university, transferred as a junior. And certainly when I took cognitive psychology and started to study confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance, and actually saw research and was part of a research lab that was a lab of cognitive psychology on campus. I just was sucked into the world of understanding how our perceptions and our cognitions, how limited we are with our knowledge, but also how we can we can trap ourselves in our own frame of references, and we begin to freak out when our beliefs and our very strongly held convictions are challenged, and we seek foundations so that we don't have this perpetual feeling of being lost. And when I had that realization of my own limited cognition and how perhaps I needed to be challenged, and perhaps the reason why I was willing to attempt to stay in the religion of Islam, even though, like yourself, I turned to the philosophers and the Mu'tazila and the Sufis and Ibn Arabi, and I kept saying to myself, okay, well, I can still consider myself a Muslim, but I just won't consider myself a Sunni Muslim in the organized Orthodox sense. I'll just consider myself and so I kind of went back to these different schools of thought, which I agreed more based on their theological approach. But then I was faced, like you said, with the realization that there would be no typical Muslim who would take me seriously, who would not consider me Muslim. And that was very obvious to me because along this journey, I kept posting YouTube videos, and you and I engaged in some back and forth at one point on YouTube. And the comments were very telling. I was getting private messages and comments from people saying, "Oh, you've strayed from, the path." And I mean, that you've made headways when you come up on a Orthodox Sunni chat forum website. They're talking about Aussie CDA has strayed from the Sunnah, and he's embraced philosophy, which is a true statement. You can find that online. So it was very obvious to me that I was no longer considered to be in the fold by many Muslims, at least online. And like you said, I found myself wondering, well, I doubt so much of this structure that is Islam. I doubt so much of it. It seems rather ridiculous to consider myself a Muslim. And so, yeah, I decided to just stop considering myself one as such.
Mm-hmm. I kind of saw it coming myself, Colin, not just based on your videos, but I was like, okay, he's a psychology major. He's into Carl Jung. If he chooses to go the counseling and mental health route, like you were saying, it's impossible not to come across Buddhism because the core of Buddhism is suffering and the cessation of suffering. And then mindfulness has pretty much swept the counseling and mental health field in terms of as a legitimate approach, in addition to cognitive behavioral therapy or psychoanalysis or depth psychology in the route that you were taking. And with Carl Jung and his views on Gnosticism and religion and your admiration for him, I was like, there's no way. I mean, how is he going to reconcile it? But I was like, even in theory, even if you do stay a Muslim and you begin to reconcile it, I still saw yourself going more along the lines of ilm al-kalam and tasawwuf, meaning mysticism. And so lo and behold, here you are, Colin. You're right. You're right there with me, brother.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, it was weird because when I had been studying or reading Carl Jung even before I became a psych major. I mean, as early as like 2007, 2008, I had been reading Carl Jung and had been exposed to Joseph Campbell. But I think at that time, I was still very much trying to learn as much about Islam as I could and trying to essentially, just immerse myself in the tradition and follow the religion to the best of my ability as a Sunni Muslim. And when I was reading Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell at the same time, really all that did for me was it confirmed to me that religion is can be looked at psychologically. So it was a very, very root of, again, it was really more of, I had those things in my bag of tricks for my own confirmation bias. Because if someone was like, oh, so if I ever heard an argument where someone said, oh, someone could argue that the religion is psychologically unhealthy, I could be like, well, boom, there's Carl Jung, bam, there you go, let's move on, right? So, and I definitely appreciated his theories, but I didn't really I didn't truly follow his lead as I do now. That certainly took time. And so I think I was too busy absorbing myself into traditional Islam for me to fully embrace the more depth psychological approach for myself. But now that's totally changed. And now I certainly do. That's some of my primary foundations are depth psychology for sure.
Mm-hmm. It, in a sense, it is an expansion of the mind. It's an expansion of consciousness, and not just between you and I. We see it everywhere now. Everywhere. Like people who would be Christian, people who would be Muslim, people who would be atheist, even. Their minds are beginning to open up, and even if they hold on to their original worldview, we still see this expansion. Like for example, Yasser Qadhi was a Salafi. You know what I mean? I recently did a video where I quoted Dr. Shabir Ali and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and very evidently, very blatantly, they were professing universalism. You know what I mean? And I'm not sure if you got to see that, but as even James White, is softer than he used to come across. And so the idea is that I truly believe that there is an expansion of consciousness collectively going on, and people are waking up, so to say. But in general, it's always a psychological process. Involves the mind, and involves us opening up our minds to see alternative possibilities. And I think what happens with a lot of people who are dogmatic, be they Christian, Muslim, or atheist, is originally they have this contracted view and very limited view, and that when they truly begin to open up their heart, their subconscious mind, they begin to now perceive things a little bit differently. But unless and until they do, they're going to remain dogmatic and remain like, oh my gosh, I can't even think outside of the box. And that's what you and I did. We started to think outside of the box. And when we did, we said, aha, because we have to confront the truth when it becomes apparent to us. And, so yeah, that's basically a very identical path that you and I have followed with regards to that.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with the evidence of expansion of consciousness. And I think that there have been many writers who have predicted that, based on whether it was metaphysical claims or psychological claims, that things would progress in this direction, or that they would at least hope that was the case. I mean, for myself, looking to the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, who essentially said that the new church is essentially an expansion of consciousness. And Carl Jung, very much looking at behavioral patterns of societies and the way religion was heading, predicted, based on his studies, that we would have a shift in consciousness and a shift in the understanding of what does it mean to be religious, what is religion going to mean in the modern era for modern humans. And I did see your video, and I thought your video was great, that you quoted such people as Shabir Ali and Hamza Yusuf. I guess one thing that I wasn't aware of, you mentioned Dr. Yasser Qadhi, and I actually was talking about Yasser Qadhi with Klingshore, not on an episode, just talking with him in general, and about his book, Yasser Qadhi's book, Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran. Totally separate subject, but it was very obvious that Yasser Qadhi, at least when he wrote that book, which granted I think was in 1999, appeared to have considered himself a Salafi, or at least not an Ash'ari, because he actually has a part of the book where he addresses the Ash'ari perspective and how it might be considered to be wrong. But I wasn't aware that Dr. Yasser Qadhi had changed his views. So could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure thing. He did an interview with I think it was I'm not sure if it was an American podcast or a British one, but I'm not sure if you've heard that, where he came out and said that I'm no longer Salafi anymore. Literally his own words. And I recall when Yasser Qadhi, there was a statement by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf that said that Aqidah is a disease. That's something Hamza Yusuf said, that theology can be a disease because it distracts one from spirituality. And Yasser Qadhi came on, and he was very fiery about that. And that's how he described himself. And then next thing you know, he's going to ISNA conferences and giving, side by side with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Tariq Ramadan. And everybody's like, what's going on here? And then that's when he kind of came out and says, I no longer consider myself a Salafi. He didn't say what he considers himself. And that was probably a smart move in order to kind of keep Muslims united amongst themselves. but he goes into detail about his radical changes. Then most recently, he had an interview about Shia Muslims, which is the part that I quote in the video, where he says that he now considers them Muslim, which is insane from, knowing Yasser Qadhi when he was Salafi and fiery and so on and so forth. So it's very humbling to see how people of such high standard in intellect and education, he went to Yale, he went to Medina al-Munawwara University, that, coming from that educated background, eventually he had to give into his heart. That's what happened. He had to give into his heart. And that's what he did. And lo and behold, he changes his perspective. And I hope that people like James White will continue to grow and evolve. I think that they will. Just today I saw David Wood post on his website saying that we should speak against ideologies and not, we should try to work against ideologies and not kill people, in response to an atheist who was like, let's just kill Muslims, let's like nuke Mecca or whatever. And David Wood came out and he defended that no, this is not the way to go. And so the idea is that even amongst those who are more fiery right now, or have been, we're seeing an expansion of the heart, and hopefully we'll continue to see that.
I certainly would agree, and I thank you for the clarification about Dr. Yasser Qadhi. I think that's fascinating. I didn't know any of that. I mean, I sort of pay attention to Hamza Yusuf because Zaytuna and the Graduate Theological Union is is almost in my backyard where I am in California. So I've actually seen Zaytuna. I've walked by Zaytuna. I've never seen Hamza Yusuf. If I actually get a chance to actually meet Hamza Yusuf, that would be really interesting. But every time I walk by it, I'm like, okay, wait for it. Is he going to be coming out of one of these doors? So he's on my radar a little bit more than Yasser Qadhi. But I know that you have had a lot of experience talking with James White. So when you say that James White, and I try and pay attention to James White, at least what he posts on YouTube, but when you say that he is changing to some extent, or to use that word, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about the direction that he's going?
Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say, he's a hardcore Calvinist. I don't think that he's changing his mind. I'm talking more so about his heart and how he deals with Muslims. And so, for example, he said, it's such a bad idea to talk about Aisha's marriage with Muhammad. And, and then he goes and sometimes he is intellectually honest in terms of a lot of the issues that Christians, and he'll rebuke a lot of his Christian brethren on some of the nonsensical arguments that they make against Muslims. He'll talk about, he'll call out Ergen Canner for not having been a Muslim and so on and so forth. And so it's humbling to see, even if his mind is closed towards that dogmatism and that literalism, it's good to see that his heart is a little bit open and that there is an intellectual honesty there.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, he's a very intelligent individual, and certainly he should be applauded for standing up for what we can all see objectively, at least as the abuse of certain arguments or misrepresentation of certain perspectives, and calling people out on that, even if they are members of your quote unquote group or camp. So going with this. Talking about people's hearts changing or people going in a certain direction. So, if you don't mind me asking, where do you stand now with your own beliefs? I mean, you've transitioned now into a different place now for yourself. But I'm sure that the viewers who might be watching now or will be watching this would be very curious to see where you stand currently with yourself and with your own beliefs post being a Sunni Muslim.
Sure. I definitely believe in universalism still. I still go to a Unitarian Universalism church. My epistemological approach is still mysticism, of course, still considering science and philosophy and the rest of it as well. But my preferred approach is definitely mysticism. I still am into Buddhism and Hinduism in terms of meditation and the oneness or non-duality of all that is. And I'm not hesitant in saying that I'm a Christian. I'm not hesitant in saying that I'm a Muslim. I'm not hesitant in saying I'm a Buddhist. But I think Jalaluddin Rumi's poem is even more powerful in the sense that it says to get away from labels. You know, there's a tradition in India where Gandhi claimed to be a Muslim. You know, and then many other gurus would say, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jain, I'm a Buddhist. And I love that philosophy in the sense that it's all inclusive, and it understands that there's different paths to have a relationship with the divine. But I think, you know, if I could quickly read the first few passages of Jalaluddin Rumi's poem Only Breath, where he says, not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. And then he goes on to say, you know, only that breath, that breathing human being. And so to go beyond labels is, I think, the goal of the mystic. And that's kind of where I'm at. And what about yourself, Colin?
Well, certainly very similar, I would say. I think there was a while there where I think I really was considering becoming a Unitarian Universalist. And there are still many things about Unitarian Universalism that I really enjoy. I have some really good friends that are UUs and attended their church a few times. And there's nothing that I disagree with fundamentally with Unitarian Universalism. I guess for me, I still needed some foundation that was grounded in theology, and at least the Unitarian Universalists that I knew, not that they didn't talk about theology or religion or what have you, but it was a little bit more of like, you know, focusing more on like the social justice and not so much a conversation about theological points or beliefs. And I found that I was still craving that type of community, where there was some deep discussion about metaphysics and mysticism, and I wasn't really finding that, at least in my local Unitarian Universalist churches that I checked out. So it was really by happenstance and very by accident that I stumbled across the Swedenborgian Church, or the General Convention of the New Jerusalem, as I think it's technically called. But I think it's actually the public name is Swedenborgian Church of North America. And that was purely by accident, and to stumble across some local churches in my area. And my mother had been reading Swedenborg for a few years, and the first book that I read was Swedenborg and Esoteric Islam by Henry Corbin. And it's a very small book, but a very good book. And that was good timing, because at that point I was pretty much on my way out the door of Islam. But I still really, and I still do, appreciate reading Rumi and Ibn Arabi. And this book, in the esoteric dimensions of like Shiaism. And this book by Henry Corbin did a good job of comparing and contrasting Swedenborg, the mystic and philosopher Swedenborg, and his approach to scripture and religion, and comparing it to esoteric elements of Shiaism and Ibn Arabi and to some extent Rumi. And so when I read that, I thought, well, I should read this guy Swedenborg. And so I started to read Swedenborg, and I started, read a few of his books and was just really blown away by it. And he sort of rescued, or he sort of reintroduced to me the Abrahamic traditions in a way that just felt right to me at that point. And when I started checking out some of the local churches in my area, the communities were just perfect for me. So having said that, I think, so I definitely consider myself a Swedenborgian now, but I would say that my approach to metaphysics is certainly, I think, very much influenced by like Immanuel Kant and Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. So focusing more on a mystical or religious experience and kind of looking at metaphysics as mainly theoretical. And the big emphasis is on spirituality and, the expansion of consciousness and the psyche. But as a Swedenborgian, if I had, taking that label, Swedenborgians are essentially universalists because they basically say, and Swedenborg himself said that it doesn't really matter what you believe. It just matters if your ruling love is to love the divine and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's all that really matters, and that door is pretty much open to everyone. So it doesn't really matter what doctrine or dogma or theology that you say you confess to believe in. It really matters on what's your conduct in this life and what's your prime motivation. So he's not so much a universalist in the sense that he believes or teaches. Swedenborg did not teach universal salvation in the sense that's typically understood by universalism. But he said that God does not actually send anyone anywhere. He doesn't judge, and there's no day of judgment. It essentially, you book your passage in the next life. So I use the classic example. If your ruling love is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself, and you're compassionate about helping other people, in the next life, you're going to end up in a community which we might call heaven. You're going to end up in a community of people of like minds. But if your ruling love is blackjack and hookers, then you're going to end up in a community that we might call hell. That's just perpetual blackjack and hookers. So it's not really torturous in hell. It's just the difference between selfless or selfish loves. And there's no judgment. So that's what I would say for myself.
Yeah, I mean, it all sounds like the perennial philosophy, doesn't it, Colin? In the sense that, the same wisdom has arisen in different minds at different times, whether it's Swedenborg, whether it's Carl Jung, whether it's quantum physicists. A lot of them are leading towards this oneness, this unity, this harmony, this non-judgment, allowing things to be as they are, a mystical approach, a symbolic approach, and that sort of thing. And so, but one thing that you said that's really important, Colin, is that even if you take a universalist approach, and a universalist approach, mind you, is a very different approach than an eclectic approach. So an eclectic will say that, okay, I'm going to go where the knowledge leads me. I'm going to go to biology for knowledge. I'm going to go psychology for knowledge. I'm going to go to philosophy for knowledge. I'm going to go to Islam and Christianity for knowledge. And I'm going to absorb all of this knowledge and see how it's going to benefit me to progress spiritually and psychologically and emotionally and so on and so forth, which is a great approach. But universalism pretty much doesn't necessitate eclecticism. You could be a Muslim and be a universalist. You could be a Christian and be a universalist. And one important thing that you said is that it's good to have some type of a theological foundation. So even if you're going to a Unitarian Universalism church because you're into social justice or what have you, people who go to these congregations still have some type of a theological foundation and some type of a practical foundation. And it's good to have one. Granted, for me, it's Eastern mysticism with Buddhism and Hinduism, but I love all Gnosticism, Sufism. I love all of them so much. Taoism, that they are so profound. And so I happen to be an eclectic, but you don't have to be an eclectic to be a universalist. And a lot of people confuse that. So yeah, that's kind of what I want to say, that I appreciate that you do have a theological foundation in terms of Swedenborg. And that's completely consistent with universalism. Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah, it's I mean, certainly I found with the Unitarian Universalists that I do know that they have their own spiritual or theological foundation that they have sort of cultivated for themselves, and I thought that was really great. And I think, no doubt, if I had not stumbled across Swedenborg, I probably would have landed in a Unitarian Universalist community for sure. I was also kind of entertaining, Quakerism as well, and I actually went and chilled with some Quakers not too long ago, a few Sundays back, and that was a really cool experience. And so I think, for me, I was definitely craving community because I had a pretty strong community when I was a Muslim. I certainly made a lot of new friends and had a lot of wonderful experiences in my local Islamic community, Muslim community. And so when I left that, I found myself very much struggling and missing that feeling of having a group of people that I could engage in spiritual or religious discussions with. And I think it just naturally turned out, based on my readings of Swedenborg, that it made sense that overall. But I also have worshipped at my local Hindu temple as well. I think it's a Hare Krishna temple, I do believe. And while I may not agree with all of their teachings on various subjects, namely certain teachings about the sort of anti-evolution approach and LGBTQ approach, they're not very, but what I appreciate about them is they give free food out to everyone in the community. They don't card you or anything. It doesn't matter who you are. So I'm rubbing shoulders with homeless people and people from all walks of life in their temple, and then going in and observing them and taking part in their worship and their chanting. And one thing that I've experienced is I always have a spiritual feeling. I guess you could call it a spiritual experience. But I've been in multiple houses of worship of different religions, not all of them, but enough. And I have had the same spiritual experience regardless of where I am. So whether I'm at a Swedenborgian church, whether I'm chilling with Quakers, whether I'm chanting with the Hindus, whether I go to my local Zen temple, it's all, I have the same feeling consistently. And if I don't have that feeling, I know that it's not for me. But I have had that feeling in every place that I've gone thus far, that consistently. And that to me speaks louder than theological or doctrinal debate for me personally. So that's been pretty neat. So just wanted to share that.
Oh, wow, Colin. I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. That's literally identical experience that I've had, whether it's going with the shamans or going with the Buddhists or even at the UU church. There is that same spiritual experience that you have that really lifts your spirit and helps you connect at a deeper level. I couldn't agree with that more. One thing that I did want to mention about the Hindus and evolution is that when they're talking about de-evolution, they're not necessarily talking about biological evolution. They're talking about de-evolution of awareness. And so there's an awareness that the indigenous people have that seems to have de-evolved to a certain extent. That because the different types of stimuli that the indigenous people had, they were keen. Their awareness of the mystical or spiritual realms were a little bit more potent. Whereas that's kind of de-evolved with all of the different stimuli that exist now. I don't think that they're necessarily against biological evolution. There's even this theory, if you look at the avatars of Vishnu, it literally goes from the fish to the reptile to the mammal, and then to the dwarf, and then eventually, to the human being. And then it's going to continue, apparently. And so I think that there's differences of opinion there. But wow, I couldn't agree. I think that that's such an important point, Colin. The spiritual experiences that you feel in these different organized religions definitely seem to be consistent, and I just think that that's so important.
Yeah, I appreciate your clarification, and I thank you for that, because I don't want anyone watching this either presently or in the future to think that I'm speaking. I didn't, to overgeneralize Hindu thought with regards to its relationship to evolution. So I do appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, my basis for saying that is I've been told this by friends of mine who regularly go there, that some of the public lectures and some of their literature at this specific place would seem to reflect a sort of a trashing of the biological, of Darwinian evolution. But certainly I know that that's not the case for all Hindus, certainly. to the extent that many people I know personally will usually skip the lecture and go straight to the free meal and then the chanting afterwards, because they've heard enough kind of odd things at some of the public lectures. But yeah, I certainly think my experience has taught me that regardless of the external expression of these organized faiths, there is this common strain that appears to be present in each one, and that I certainly have experienced it in a variety of ways, which has been pretty profound. So let's see. I wanted to see if there was anything. Well, I guess one thing I wanted to ask you, slightly off topic, but I'm just curious because I know you mentioned this last time. I know you had said that you were in correspondence with James White, so I'm wondering if you were to ever to debate James White again, would you debate him on a topic that's similar to what we're talking about right now, perhaps universalism, or what do you envision being a future topic with Dr. James White? Just out of curiosity.
Here's the thing. I wrote an email to James White that he was kind of upset with. He listened to the video about universalism, and he heard and I wanted him to hear it because he's debated Dr. Shabir Ali a number of times and has a great amount of respect for him. And yet all of the quote unquote ushy squishy or whatever words he uses to describe liberals when he talks about Christians, he really can get condescending towards, like, Rob Bell. He makes fun of his glasses and stuff like that. But he has this tremendous amount of respect for Shabir Ali. And I'm like, look, he has the same ushy squishy stuff that you're getting on your Christian the Christian liberals about. But he was upset that I said that the Westboro Baptist Church was an example of Calvinism. Hello, it is. And I was like, look, it is. They're 5-point Calvinists. Here's proof. And then he was like, he responded to my email. He said, no, if you can't tell the difference, you're delusional. I was like, hey, I mentioned ISIS as an example of Islam, and I called them terrorists. Let's be clear here. They're not representative of all Salafis or all Muslims in general. I wanted to point out that there is an extreme with Calvinists and Salafis specifically. These two schools of thought are the two most extreme schools of thought within these two traditions of Islam and Christianity. And you happen to be a part of one of them. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a lighter version of Calvinism. You do. But so, I mean, I don't know. He was kind of upset about that email. So I'm not sure where we stand at this point. We had an exchange of a little bit of a back and forth. I'm going to be debating Matt Slick about universalism later on, either at the end of this month or the beginning of September. So I'm looking forward to that. But if I were to debate James White, Colin, I would want to. I'm not interested in debating him about universalism. I would be open to that. Here's the thing: he wouldn't be able to use the Bible because I'm not coming with the Bible as a foundation, right? And so he would have to have a philosophical conversation with me, where I would add scientific arguments. And I'm not sure he's that type of a person who has that background to debate it from a scientific and philosophical perspective. If I were to debate James White, and James White would be interested in any debate with me again in the future, maybe even I can pay for it. I think what we would debate on is hermeneutics, how to approach scripture, the mystical versus the exegetical, because he is so exegetical and so non-mystical symbolic that he needs to understand that there's different ways of looking at scripture. He is in dire need of that. And that's what I would be interested in dialoguing with James White about. I definitely want to hear your feedback with regards to that. And then I was hoping to ask you a question as well. I'll go ahead and.
Sure. So I thank you for that. Yeah, I would say that. Well, I think Dr. White is comfortable where he's at, and I don't really blame him for that. I think that I think potentially the problem with individuals like himself, and I don't mean to just pick on him, but I think this is an honest assessment, is that he has a huge investment in his position. I mean, his job is literally riding on the fact that that he is that perspective, right? He's got a church, he has a ministry, he's got a radio show, he's got, I mean, it is literally his job. And so I don't say that's like a persona or something, but what I would argue is that if I were to analyze that, if you want to have elements that makes it harder for someone to get out of their cognitive distortions or their confirmation biases, if you want to just add the layers or the weight of that sort of mental trap to be stuck in your own perspective, just add a job, an income, you know, and an influence, and it's like, you know, if he were to say, oh, well, you know, Farhan, I think you're actually onto something, that would be a real challenge to everything that's extremely foundational for him, socially, politically, you know, economically, professionally, you know, the list goes on and on and on, let alone theologically or from a religious perspective. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how difficult or how easy or what it would be like for him to engage in such a dialogue that's more philosophical, because I think he's more used to defending Christianity or his version of Christianity against people who are attacking it. That's sort of his bread and butter. But I don't recall him ever really having that type of debate that doesn't have Christianity or the Bible to some extent as a foundation to the debate topic. But I think certainly everyone's looking forward to your debate with Matt Slick, and hopefully, even if James White had such a negative reaction to your video, hopefully he might come around, because I think it would be really interesting to see him step out of his typical circle and have a go at that sort of topic. But I guess only time will tell. But go ahead with your question.
Sure thing. My question actually feeds off of what we were just talking about in terms of, you know, the bread and butter of James White and how he hasn't really stepped outside of that. Very briefly before I do ask the question, you know, this has been my experience, because I've talked to Muslim apologists who are in the debate circuit, and I've talked to Christian apologists who are on the debate circuit about this, and coming from this perspective is very different for them. They're used to debating either atheists, Muslims, or Christians. And this perspective, they don't do very well with it. I'll be honest with you, they don't do well with it. And they get really uncomfortable and they don't know what to do with it. And that's why I want to continue to challenge them. And the reason why I want to challenge them, because I think it's better for humanity. It's not an egoic thing. It's not let me prove myself and prove them wrong. It's because I really and truly believe that it's better for humanity. I believe that I sincerely know that it is the truth. And, you know, in terms of that inner truth that I'm talking about, unconditional love, forgiveness for everything, literally everything, that everything is forgivable. And our hearts speak to this when we experience suffering ourselves and when we see other people suffering, that unconditional love and absolute forgiveness is something that we know deep down inside is true. And we know that if we're able to do it as human beings, that God Almighty, that his unconditional love and his understanding of our nature is far more profound. And that's why I want to challenge them to consider that. But, you know, having said that, my question to you is this, Colin. What, you know, putting the debaters aside, because like you said, they have so much investment. You know, Nabil Qureshi has invested his entire life into Christianity now. It's pretty impossible for him to get out of it, even if he wanted to. He has a wife and a kid now. You know what I mean? It's so difficult to get out of that now, even if he wanted to. Even if he had an epiphany and was awakened to reality, it would be so difficult to get out. You know, I pray that he does, but I doubt that he will. But my question is, putting those people who are so invested aside for a moment, what is it that, from a psychological perspective, what is it that you think keeps people in general from being open up? And by people, I mean Christians and Muslims and atheists. What do you think it keeps them psychologically from opening up to alternative possibilities?
Well, I think certainly most of what we study in cognitive psychology, I think, is pretty much the answer to this question. I think, for me, it's my understanding of cognitive dissonance and cognitive distortion. I think and I would say this for everyone. I think because I honestly don't believe that there's anything as a true agnostic, in the sense where someone is just sitting there going, oh, I have no opinion about any of this stuff, and I'm okay with that. I don't believe that really exists. And my reason for saying that is because, and I'm not denying agnosticism. I know agnostics get a lot of crap, especially from atheists like Richard Dawkins, who basically call them, like, fence sitters and stuff like that. I totally believe that people, that agnosticism, there are people who are agnostic. We are all agnostic and atheist about certain things. We all are. That's just a fact. But at the same time, none of us are 100% agnostic, or 100% atheist, or 100% theist, or whatever in anything, because I would say that's impossible. It's impossible to sit there and go, I don't have an opinion about anything, because the nature of our seeking knowledge is we acquire information, we establish foundations and opinions about things, and that helps us sort of navigate any other information that comes our way. We are constantly looking for a lens by which we can view reality and view new information. So I think what is important is for all people to realize that they have inescapable biases, that no matter who you are, you're going to be standing on foundations that are represented by confirmation bias, or perhaps the fear of cognitive dissonance, right? We hate to have the feeling that we don't know. We hate to have the feeling that we're being challenged, like I said earlier. So if you start talking to somebody, and this isn't just religion, this could be politics, this could be people's belief about biology or what have you. If you start challenging their assertions, they start to get the mental sensation of cognitive dissonance, which is essentially their foundation is beginning to crumble. And they begin to look around for some other alternative, or they go into complete denial about the invading information. Now, as I said, I think what keeps people like Muslim apologists, people like Hamza Zortzis or Adnan Rashid, and Ira in the UK, what I would say, what keeps James White, what keeps the people of, the members of ISIS, and by no means am I comparing all these people ethically, by the way. I don't want anyone to think that I'm actually literally comparing James White to ISIS, please. I am not saying that. I do not want to get in trouble with James White. What many people have in common is, and this is all on a spectrum, I would certainly predict that someone like James White would have a better chance of escaping their cognitive distortions than members of ISIS, for an example. But everyone's on the spectrum of how trapped are you by your cognitive biases and the trap of the fear of cognitive dissonance. How trapped are you? And the most that we can hope for as individuals, as conscious individuals, is to recognize our limitations, recognize that we don't have all the answers, and to constantly challenge ourselves, but also to be open to different pieces of information and be okay that we may not have all the answers. And I think that is something that many people are striving for, but I think that there are individuals that kind of put themselves in a mental trap where they don't have the option of thinking outside the box, and for various reasons. And you said, that Nabil, Qureshi, he's got a wife and kids. James White's got a job. For various reasons, people are going to be stuck in their biases, and it's unfortunate. But that, again, it is an expansion of consciousness. So I think I kind of repeated myself a little bit from before. So if you have any other follow-up specific question, please feel free.
The first question that pops up for me, Colin, is when are you going to have your first debate? That's what I want to know, because I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it, and I'm ready to see it, and I can't wait for it. So that's definitely one question that I have for you. One quick thing that I wanted to mention is in terms of investment. You can even look at Sam Harris, for example. He's written all these books. He has these followers who are skeptics and materialists and reductionists and stuff like that. And when he has come out and spoken about spirituality and mysticism and meditation and psychedelics and stuff like that, like all of the atheists cringe. And so, and Sam knows this. And so, but he has to be able to keep his audience in order to sell books. You know what I mean? But Sam Harris has definitely moved on that borderline too, hasn't he? So those are my two questions. Don't forget the first question. I want to know.
Well, I don't have one scheduled yet. I no, I think that's a fair question. I don't know. Would I like to have a public dialogue with people? Sure. And like I said, the GTU and Zaytuna is in my backyard, and I would love to have some sort of dialogue with Hamza Yusuf. I almost said Hamza Zortzis. But hey, Hamza Zortzis, why not, right? But yeah, I would love to have a discussion with Hamza Yusuf. I think that would be really cool. Not so much a debate, but just maybe like a dialogue to ask him some questions. I'm always curious about people who are converts, and since that's our theme, right? Conversion and apostasy. He himself being a convert to Islam and sort of being such an important figure for American Islam, I would say it would be really cool just to have maybe some recorded dialogue with him. But yeah, I'm not against debate. I just don't know. As you said, you brought up something really important. I've been saying this for a while now, that a typical debate is usually, typical religious people, your typical Christian, literal dogmatic Christian debating the literal dogmatic Muslim, or the literal dogmatic atheist debating the literal dogmatic Christian. That's the typical debate. I really don't see very many debates happening, as you said earlier, with people who sort of embrace our perspective, because we represent, as I've said many times, and there's a particular Kantian scholar that calls it, the critical theism or the Kantian approach to religion, which pays attention more to the psychological experience. And you can't really debate that, because you can't. How can one debate someone's subjective experience, right? So if you, Farhan, if you say, I had this experience yesterday, I can't be like, well, that's BS. I'm sorry. I'm going to show you why your subjective experience isn't true. I mean, you can't really do that. I mean, you can offer alternatives. You can say, oh, well, physiologically, maybe this is why you had that experience, but whatever. The fact of the matter is, the subjective experience, which I would think that you and I are emphasizing that approach more than a theoretical metaphysical approach, is more concerned with experiential, phenomenology. But I think the other two camps, the reductionists and the more literal traditional perspective, they typically like to argue about objective things. Can science prove God? Yes or no? That's an objective topic. That's an objective claim, which people can mudsling back and forth. Which religion's true? Islam or Christianity? Go, right? The reason why those debates jive with most people is because they're talking about, I would argue, objective reality. We're talking about organized religion. We're talking about theological theories. We're talking about, can science prove this or that or the other? Does science disprove this, that, and the other? I would be down to have a debate with somebody. I just don't know what that topic would look like, and I don't really know how many takers we would get for that type of debate. So that's my answer to your first question. So I don't know if you want me to pause, if you want to respond to that, or if you want me to just go to Sam Harris. But what you want me to just keep going? Okay. So Sam Harris. Now, I've done a few blog posts and at least one video about Sam Harris, because I read his book Waking Up, and I definitely commented on my thoughts on his book. Also, a particular point in The End of Faith where he mocks Joseph Campbell, which I think I mentioned the last time we were on the show together. And yeah, I certainly appreciate Sam Harris's willingness to engage in forms of meditation or psychedelics or expansion of consciousness and things like that. But yeah, he cannot let go of his primary crowd or his audience, as you said, for the sale of his books. because if he were to do that, he would be canning his entire infrastructure would just be, he'd be detonating it. And so he can't fully step away from the reductionist atheist perspective. Having said that, he deserves credit for being consistent with himself to this extent, because he does get a lot of crap from people who are typically readers of Hitchens and Dawkins, who usually dismiss discussions of spirituality or mysticism or meditation as just hocus pocus. So he deserves credit where credit is due. But I would agree that he cannot bring himself fully into potentially our perspective for the reasons that I think we've both stated, which is, perhaps a cognitive distortion, or at least a confirmation bias, perhaps. But just, I think probably because, he doesn't want to nuke his foundational base, which is his crowd or his audience.
Wait, I did want to say, in terms of anecdotal experiences and things of that nature, I'm not so much interested in debating those as much as I am interested in debating philosophically and scientifically universalism and mysticism. I think objectively, philosophically and scientifically, both of those approaches can be argued. And there's plenty of deductive reasoning and scientific facts that we can bring forward to prove those things as being a closer version to reality and truth than some of the other alternative possibilities. But granted, when talking about anecdotal experiences, one thing that we can do is talk about the similarity between mystical experiences cross-culturally and across the board in general in a perennial sense, and the similarities of mystical experiences. And there's been some studies and some research done on that. William James wrote a book called The Variety of Religious Experiences, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely arguments that we could construct. But what I would still say is that Christian, Muslims, and atheists, they're not used to debating these topics. And they haven't. Tell me one apologist who debates from our perspective. Okay, you've got Deepak Chopra, right? Who's had like 1 or 2 debates. Here's the thing, Deepak Chopra is not a debater. I love Deepak Chopra, I love what he does, but he can stay in his camp and get a philosopher or an apologist who's done research on alternative perspectives to debate these issues. And I guarantee you, the atheist, the Muslim, and the Christian will have a very difficult time. And from my experience, they don't know what to do with it. And the reason why I think they don't know what to do with it is because this is ringing true to them. It's when truth occurs and it becomes apparent, and the heart knows that it's true, it resonates, and yet the mind and the ego fight with it. They argue with it, and there's defense mechanisms in play because there's an emotional attachment to one's identity as a Muslim, as a Christian, or as an atheist possibly. And that emotional attachment does not allow them to seriously consider this perspective of universals and spirituality and that sort of thing. But I think that we have strong arguments, philosophical and scientific, for us. Now, in terms of Sam Harris, here's the thing. Honestly, I don't want him to come to this camp, and here's why. I think he's useful. I think he's doing exactly what he needs to do, because he's getting atheists to become spiritual for the first time. He's getting atheists to pursue some of these things like meditation and mystical experiences. And it's opening up people who wouldn't otherwise consider these things. And so I think Sam Harris is exactly where he should be. And he's helping a lot of people doing what he's doing in a paradoxical kind of way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that that's an excellent point regarding Sam Harris. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I agree with most of what you said. Pretty much like 99.9% of it. I guess from my own personal perspective, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable having a debate with somebody where I was talking about science beyond, one that I'm more comfortable with, which would be like, which would be psychology or psychotherapy, with regards to our position. I would be totally comfortable talking about the alternative approach to religion being one of a more psycho-spiritual perspective, because I think that that's one that doesn't get a lot of airtime. I guess the thing that because I, again, sort of take my approach to metaphysics from Kant and Jung is that I can't really convince anyone of anything objective, because most of objective topics are essentially theoretical when it comes to metaphysics, which is why I feel more comfortable talking about shared experiences on the subjective level. So it gets more qualitative proofs than quantitative. Now, having said that, do I think that there could be a philosopher out there, or and I know that there are spiritual philosophers and spiritual physicists that have done books. In fact, I have a few checked out from the library right now, some physicists that are spiritual and see a link between physics and spirituality and mysticism and meditation and consciousness studies. And I think that's great. I think those are fascinating topics to have. I personally just wouldn't feel comfortable having that type of debate for myself. But having said that, let's see here. I'm looking at the time here. So it's 5:36 p.m. my time. So we have, about 20 or so minutes left in the show. And so I just wanted to, for people who are just tuning in now, or my guest today is Farhan Qureshi, and the topic is Islam, apostasy, and conversion to Islam in particular and religion generally. That's our main topic for today. And if anybody has any questions or would like to actually call in, as it were, to join the discussion, ask a question of Farhan and myself, there are a few ways you can do this. I believe if you comment on the live stream that's happening on my YouTube channel, I'll get a notification for that. You can always message me in some way, whether through Twitter or my Facebook, Aussie CDA, the Facebook page that I have. There's multiple ways to get to me and let me know that you'd like to ask a question, or want to join to actually speak to Farhan and I. Let's see. Having said that, Farhan, I don't know if you had any other questions or pressing questions or anything you'd like to bounce off.
But one thing I was going to say is, because I kind of felt what you were saying in terms of bringing up scientific facts, particularly when we're not biologists and physicists, right? And that's been a common theme that's come up. That if you're not a physicist, and this is what Sam Harris tells to Deepak Chopra, you're not a physicist. But here's the thing: there are certain facts that everyone will agree with, that are empirical and scientific facts, that we can use as a premise and then use deductive reasoning from. And for example, that perception is relative. That's something that's empirical. It's a scientific fact. Nobody can argue with it. And then what are the implications of that fact, that perception is relative? And that's, I would get into the philosophical implications of that scientific fact. Or if you're talking about physics, and I do feel very uncomfortable talking about physics, what you can do is say that there are a number of physicists, or there are a school of several physicists who have come up with this hypothesis, or for example, the multiverse theory, which isn't a fact. You know what I mean? And what are the implications if this is true? All of these, I'm not claiming the multiverse theory. Don't ask me for the equations. What I'm saying is that all of these physicists are talking about the multiverse theory. I can be a philosopher. I can think about the implications of the theoretical concept. You can't tell me that I can't. You know what I mean? Why would you tell me that I can't have comments about a theory? You know what I mean? That doesn't mean that I'm going to start doing equations. And a lot of people confuse this with claiming to be authoritative or something like that. That's not the case. That's not the case at all. We can talk about theories. We're intellectual people. Everyone can have an insight about theories. And so that's kind of where I was going with the ability for us to debate these issues. So that's the only other comment I wanted to make.
I thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I certainly think I would agree totally that obviously we don't need to be physicists, or there's a member of my congregation who is a Swedenborgian, and he's a physicist, and he's actually done a book on the subject of looking at spirituality through the a marriage between spirituality and physics in physics. So I obviously cannot deny that work is being done. I think for me, because I understand, or at least in my opinion, and again, this is more of a Kantian approach, is the limitations of our cognition, what we can objectively know for certain. And I think that scientists would agree that we're doing the best we can with the knowledge that we have. And it would be arrogant for anyone to suggest that we have a full understanding of any of these things. And I just think that God, the concept of the divine, is so beyond our understanding. It's utterly transcendent. That for me, while I think it's fascinating to read books like the Tao of Physics, or whatever it might be, and to discuss the theoretical implications of these things. I guess for me, if I'm going to have a discussion about what's the importance of spirituality, or how can one necessarily prove spirituality as a fact, to me, I feel like I can speak better to the psychological fact of these cognitions, or these spiritual experiences, because they are subjective, because they are experiences that many people have shared around the world. Whereas if you start talking to an atheist about, like for example, back when I was a Muslim apologist, I of course like to talk to people about, oh, did you know that the Quran has scientific miracles? That it talked about scientific claims, right? People's eyes glaze over when you start talking about stuff like that, because you are attempting to take something that fundamentally, in my opinion, is a spiritual, subjective experience. The religious experience is by nature subjective. We can hypothesize that its origin is objective or metaphysical, but I think we do a disservice, in my opinion, when we try and slam objective quantitative proofs with subjective qualitative proofs. I do think that we start on some slippery slopes there, potentially, if you see what I mean.
Oh, I would agree with you, and that's why we have to be careful in our wordings, use the rules of logic, make sure that we're consistent, check ourselves in our consistency, and so on and so forth. But I think that it's completely possible to have these conversations, to have these debates, and it's not outside of our realms to have these debates. I think people in general are having these conversations and debates, whether in public or in personal circles, and they should. Now, sticking with coming back to the topic of apostasy and conversion and that sort of thing, what do you think is what do you see the situation as being in the world in terms of people leaving Christianity and Islam specifically? I think the polls have shown that more people than ever in history before are claiming to no longer belong to an organized religion. And some people the frustrating thing is atheists, agnostics, and then New Agers and people who think like us, open-minded skeptics, philosophers who might believe in God, agnostic theists. All of us are getting lumped in together because we don't affiliate with an organized religion. Those who claim to be spiritual but not religious, we're all kind of lumped together. I don't mind that necessarily. What do you think?
Well, I don't mind it either, to be honest, because I think it's nice to be in this group that is not part of a traditional organized group. I think you and I, we do belong to some organized group. I mean, it's the Swedenborgian Church of North America for myself, and for you, the Unitarian Universalist Church. Having said that, though, they're so different than your typical groups. I mean, both UU and Swedenborgian are so different from what we might say is your typical Christianity or Abrahamic approach, or what have you. Now, to answer your question fully, I think people are they're faced, I think, with the conundrum that you and I were faced with when we were both Sunni Muslims. I think people suddenly realized that the typical traditional origin narrative or the traditional doctrines just don't answer all the questions. And in fact, when a dogma, when a system becomes dogmatized or becomes dogmatic, you essentially are trying to put a period to the end of the discourse or the possibility. And I think right now in our day and age, people don't want to be told, just shut up and believe. Stop thinking so much and just accept that we believe this because people throughout the history of our tradition say we should believe it, and you can trust all of it because people who were scholars in the past said you could trust it. Okay, so it's this inventive circular reasoning, which I'm still amazed that I bought into it and that many people still buy into it, because it is totally illogical, in my opinion, to hold this view. I think it's okay to say traditionally this has been this opinion. But to say, oh, well, why do you believe this? Oh, well, I take it for granted because I trust that these scholars and all these religious figures were all, these great people that had perfect memories and can memorize things perfectly, or, God was whispering to them and told them, oh, you're a saint or you're the Pope, and, here's this dogma. And I believe it because people say I should believe them because I should believe them. I mean, it's totally illogical. So I think when people first run into that problem, and they run into the problem that if you look at scripture literally or doctrines literally, you run into the problem of history contradicting it, science contradicting it, philosophy contradicting it, psychology contradicting it. Many of the hard and social sciences overwhelmingly contradict a more dogmatic approach to religion. And so I think when people are barraged with all of this, they think to themselves, well, is it really necessary for me to be a member of at least a dogmatic organized group? Because I think, liberal Christians, progressive Christians, right, don't take their scripture necessarily literally, nor do they view things dogmatically. But I think the reason why while organizations are losing numbers rapidly is because people want to be individuals in their own journey. They don't want to be beholden to a large group or a community for fear that they're going to be told, well, guess what? We're going to be excommunicating you now, or if you take this position, you're an apostate. I think people have had bad experiences with large groups, and so that's left a bad taste in their mouth, and yet they still consider themselves spiritual. They still have that hunger for the transcendent, but they are apprehensive towards joining a group. And just to end here, I can relate to that because I at first was very, very skeptical that the UU Church, that the Quakers or the Swedenborgians, when I first started looking into those as possibilities for myself for a community, I was incredibly hyper skeptical about it because I had had my experiences with Catholics and with Muslims as organizations, and I just thought to myself, do I really want to join another organization? Do I really want to do that? And I was very skeptical, and the only reason why I joined the Swedenborgian Church is because they like UUs and Quakers and very progressive Sufi Muslims and progressive Jews, they exemplify what Erich Fromm, the psychoanalyst, called a humanistic approach to religion. In other words, they honor an individual's journey within a community of individuals that are all searching for something, and they don't necessarily have to be ruled by an authoritarian dogmatic structure, which is unfortunate that many religious folks grow up in that type of environment, and hence why they leave. But that's just my opinion, and I'll pass it back to you.
Colin, the way that you answered it from beginning to end, that's what the world needs to hear. Literally, your answer is what the world needs to hear, and it's so refreshing to see you. Seeing you a couple of years ago to where you're at now, it's absolutely inspiring to me to see that. So the next step I want to take is let's make some predictions. I want you to go first. Where do you see the world 500, 1,000 years from now? If human beings, human civilization is still flourishing, what do you see the religious and spiritual state of the people Is Abrahamic theology still going to be around? If it is, what is it going to look like? What are people going to believe? What's atheism going to look like? I want to hear your perspective, and I'll give my insights on it as well.
Great question. Yeah. So I think it's a great place to go with the last 10 minutes in the show. So I think I'll try to be as brief as possible because I'd like to hear your views as well. I typically would go with the trends that were observed by Swedenborg, to be honest. I think that organized religion, or what people say when they say church or mosque or synagogue, I think that's going to radically change and evolve into our future. I think if we're all still around the planet and we haven't nuked ourselves or completely destroyed the ozone layer, and we're actually managed to, as a species, to still be alive, I think the spiritual hunger is still going to be there. But I think people are going to realize that the way that the traditions were generally organized just is not working. And the trends seem to indicate that that is true, considering how so many people are leaving the traditional organized paths. But yet they still want community. So I really predict that there's going to be sort of this post-traditional religious renaissance of spiritual seekers that are going to come together to discuss deep metaphysical, mystical truths for themselves, and who will an environment to facilitate subjective experiences. I don't think that's not going to go away. So I really do see, based on Swedenborg and Jung's predictions, that we are seeing the death of traditional organized religion. I think it's on its last breath, and the vacuum that's going to be created from it is going to basically be people. The question is going to be, do you accept spirituality or and the transcendent? Yes or no? That's going to be the fundamental question. And for people who say no, then they are going to be the camp that's basically very much skeptical, and the other camp is going to be spiritual and into the transcendent, and forming theories and opinions about the transcendent and experiencing it. But I do think the atheist camp will be able to experience spirituality, but they just will not attribute it to a transcendent reality. I think that's what it's going to come down to. It's going to be this sort of subjective and philosophical notion of transcendent, in the transcendent realm, but what does that mean for people, as opposed to, oh, you're a Muslim, you're a Jew, you're a Christian. I think those labels are going to be dissolving probably like in 1,000 years from now, I would be willing to say. But how about yourself?
I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that you said, but what I would say is, if we look at the current situation, you have the baby boomers who are still alive. They hold many of the various positions of authority, and both in religion and politics and government and so on and so forth. I think when they pass away, and then our generation kind of takes over, and then the next generation that follows us is going to be far more inclusive, far more progressive, far more open-minded. I think the knowledge that's coming in from science is definitely opening up our minds in ways that we've never imagined before. Technology is globalizing the world in ways like never before. We're connected in ways like never before. And that's only, according to Moore's law, every 18 months or so, technology doubles. And so, with this continuous expansion, I definitely see spirituality is still going to be there. Belief in the transcendence is still going to be there. And in terms of the organized religion, particularly the Abrahamic religions, it's going to die out. I think the churches and the mosques are not going to influence the hearts and minds of the people. Now, what I think people are going to do is we're going to value where we've come from, just like when we value Egyptian mythology or Greek mythology or what have you. Very valuable stories and very valuable insights. Know thyself is written on the Oracle of Delphi, and so we'll be able to take some of those gems, that perennial wisdom, and kind of incorporate it into this all-inclusive philosophy that humanity is then going to begin to embrace. I think there's going to be atheists in the sense that they're denying this anthropomorphic masculine figure that sits atop a throne and surveillances and judges everyone for sins that I don't believe that it's their fault to begin with. But what I think how the atheists are going to be different is that some of the science that's coming in, particularly physics, and what's going to come out with the Higgs boson and the Higgs field and the Large Hadron Collider and some of the revelations that are going to come from that. We're sending these the James Webb telescope that's going to dwarf the Hubble telescope. In 2018, we're sending the LISA into outer space that's going to be able to read gravitational waves, and all of these things that we're doing is going to provide us with information that's going to allow us to move beyond not necessarily atheism, but reductionism. I think we're going to tap into realities that we were not aware of before, and this is going to help atheists move away from reductionism. And so, even in terms of consciousness, as we get to map out the brain, Obama launched this project to map out the entire brain. They're called the Brain Initiative. Just like the Genome Project, we now have the Brain Initiative. And as we tap into the intricacies of the brain, even at the level, the atomic and subatomic level and quantum level, and as we begin to understand consciousness at a whole different level, I think reductionism is going to begin to dissipate. But they're still going to be atheists in the sense that they're denying these deities and stuff like that. I'll go ahead and let you respond.
Well, I certainly would agree with what you've said. I think it's going to be exciting times. I mean, I think we are in exciting times. I mean, there's kind of like the good, the bad, and the ugly right now with our current global situation. But I think humans are following the typical patterns, especially talking about the Middle East, for example, and ISIS rearing its ugly head, if you will. There were religious wars after the Reformation, and ISIS is certainly a product of Islam's religious wars post their Reformation, and so I think the next step for Islam is hopefully a renaissance, quickly, hopefully very fast track into enlightenment. But I think, like I said, if we manage not to blow ourselves up, I think certainly we will have a chance with our generation and future generations to innovate and experience very, very fascinating times, considering how interesting things are going right now. So I'm looking at the clock now. We have about 3 minutes before the episode will be over. So I just wanted to thank you again, Farhan, for having you on. And just wanted to let the viewers know, those who are watching it now and will be watching it when this is archived, but I just want to do a plug for the next episode, this next scheduled episode, which will be August 29th. That's a Saturday at 4:30 p.m. My special guest on that episode will be Klingshore, and he and I will be discussing the science of Hadith, essentially looking at Hadith criticism both from within Islam and outside of Islam. So, traditional and also critical assessment of that topic, which I'm looking forward to. And certainly, Farhan, I would love to have you on again. I'm sure you and I can figure out a dozen topics to discuss in future episodes. So certainly, I would love to have you on. So any future ideas that you might have, please feel free to email me and let me know your thoughts. And if you know of anyone else, any other user that would like to be on as well, please let me know. And for those watching, if anyone has any potential topics they'd like to see for future episodes, I'm up for any suggestions as well. But I just wanted to thank you, Farhan, for joining me again.
Thanks, Colin. It's always a pleasure. And the only other thing that I wanted to add to what's already been said is, culturally speaking, people have referred to this as postmodernity, and I think postmodernism is going to continue to evolve to new heights, and we'll see where it goes. It is exciting times, and I look forward to your show with Klingshore, and I also look forward to talking with you, and I'll figure out some other topics, and we'll continue progressing on our journey as well. Thank you, and peace be with you.
And peace be with you as well, Farhan. Thank you very much for joining me. So with a minute left in the show, I just want to thank everyone who was watching. I think for the first time, the viewer count was up to 5 at one point. That's awesome. And for those who are watching it as a archived video, thank you again for everyone's support. Please feel free to leave comments, pose questions for Farhan and I, and also any topics of interest that you'd like to see this show focus on in future episodes. So with that, thank you all for watching, and peace be with you all.